The Christmas Eve encounter the streets of New York shimmered under the pale glow of Christmas lights. Yet the air was heavy with a kind of loneliness that no decoration could chase away. It was the kind of night when snow fell in thin, swirling veils, making halos around every street lamp, the kind of night when families huddled inside warm homes, laughter spilling from windows and carols floating from radios. But for Roland Caldwell, billionaire investor, real estate mogul, and a man known for his iron spine in boardrooms, Christmas Eve had never been about warmth. It was another night, another date on the calendar, another season where deals could still be struck across continents by phone calls and coded emails. His world revolved around power and control, but for reasons he couldn't quite name, this night felt different. He had dismissed his chauffeur for a walk, something he hadn't done in years, wanting to breathe in the sharp air and clear his thoughts before returning to a penthouse that, despite its golden chandeliers and imported leather chairs, always felt painfully empty. His polished shoes crunched against the snow, his breath rising in little clouds of white when he saw her dot at first. It was only movement in the corner of his eye, a small figure crouched beside a rusted trash bin outside a shuttered bakery. He might have ignored it, like so many people in the city did, if not for the way the figure moved with such quiet desperation. She wasn't rummaging recklessly. She was searching carefully, methodically, as though trained by necessity. Caldwell slowed his steps, curiosity overtaking instinct. As he drew closer, he saw it was a little girl, no more than 8 or 9, with dark curls matted beneath a faded red beanie. Her coat was several sizes too big, the sleeves frayed, the zipper broken so that the cold bit at her small frame. She dug through the trash with bare hands, her breath shuddering in the night air, her eyes darting in case anyone tried to stop her. What struck him wasn't just the hunger written in every motion, but the dignity with which she carried it. Her back was straight even as her hands trembled, her expression calm though the act should have been humiliating. Caldwell felt something tug at him, something he had buried long ago. The part of him that once knew struggle before he'd learned to mask it with steel and wealth. He stood a few feet away, uncertain whether to approach. Normally he would have walked past. His life had been built on not getting entangled in things that didn't serve him. But then she shifted, and a thin chain around her neck glinted beneath the streetlight. Hanging from it was a heart-shaped silver locket. Caldwell froze. The world around him seemed to narrow until all he could see was that locket, the way it caught the light, the way it seemed to mock him with a memory he had locked away. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, and for the first time in years, Roland Caldwell felt unsteady. That locket was not ordinary. It was identical to one he had given a young woman nearly 2 decades ago. Naomi Williams, the woman he had loved with the reckless purity of youth, the woman he had let slip away because he was too weak to fight the world's prejudice, his family's disapproval, and his own fear of choosing love over ambition. He had been 22, a boy in a Harvard dormitory who had thought the world could be held in his hands. And she had been a scholarship student from Brooklyn whose laugh made his chest ache with possibility. He had given her that locket during finals week, swearing that it was a promise of a forever he never delivered. Seeing it now on the neck of a little girl scavenging through garbage, his breath caught like he had been punched, he stepped closer, his voice breaking the silence in a way that startled even himself. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" The words felt strange, leaving his mouth softer than the sharp commands he usually used to close deals, unfamiliar in tone, almost tender. The girl jerked up, her wide eyes locking on his, cautious but not afraid. She held her ground as though she had been forced to grow up too quickly to ever tremble in front of strangers. Her lips parted, and in a voice both small and steady she answered, "I'm fine." She wasn't fine, not in any sense of the word, but Caldwell noticed the pride in her tone, the refusal to show weakness. He looked past the dirt on her shoes, past the hunger tightening her cheeks, past the thinness of her arms, and saw something else: resilience. The same kind of resilience Naomi had carried all those years ago. "What's your name?" he asked gently, trying to control the shake in his own voice. The girl straightened, her chin tilting up with a courage that broke his heart. Maya, she said. Maya Williams. Caldwell's breath caught. Williams, the name hit him like a weight he wasn't ready to bear. His throat tightened, and memories rushed back like a flood he had spent half his life trying to dam. Naomi Williams. The only woman he had ever loved. And the only one he had betrayed. Could it be? He studied the girl's eyes, and for a moment, he saw Naomi's gaze staring back at him wise, unflinching, beautiful even in hardship. He swallowed hard, every instinct inside him screaming that this wasn't coincidence. "What are you doing out here, Maya?" he asked softly. The girl blinked once, then said plainly, "Looking for food. My sister and I haven't eaten since yesterday. Mom's too sick to get up." The words sliced through him. Sister, mother. He gripped the cold metal of the lamppost to steady himself. "Where's your dad?" He forced himself to ask, though the answer already hovered like a ghost between them. Maya shrugged, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absence. "Don't have one. Never did." Caldwell felt his chest tighten until it almost hurt to breathe. He crouched to her level, his eyes searching hers for answers that would not come so easily. "Do you live nearby?" She nodded toward the east, her small finger pointing past the glow of holiday lights toward a stretch of shadows. "Under the bridge." "Near the old train yard?" Her voice carried no shame, only fact. As though this was simply the way life was, he closed his eyes briefly, the storm inside him building, then opened them with resolve. "Come on," he said, standing and signaling toward the sleek black SUV idling at the curb where his driver had insisted on waiting despite his orders. "I'll give you a ride. I'll make sure your family's safe tonight." Maya hesitated, her hand still clutching the rim of the trash bin, her body tense. With instinctive mistrust, "You don't have to," she whispered. Caldwell bent slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to." Something in the way he said it must have reached her, because she nodded slowly and followed him, her small boots crunching in the snow. When the driver opened the door, she climbed in carefully, clutching the paper napkin Caldwell handed her as though it were silk. The SUV hummed to life, its warmth enveloping them, but the cold inside Caldwell's chest only deepened as they drove through the dim, icy streets. Maya sat quietly, her eyes darting from the polished leather seats to the city lights flashing past the windows. She held herself with a dignity far older than her years, but Caldwell saw the way her hands shook as she rubbed them together for warmth. He fought the urge to reach out and cover them with his own. His gaze kept drifting to the locket around her neck, the one that had opened a door to a past he thought he had buried forever. When they reached the underpass, Caldwell stepped out with her. The air was colder here, harsher, the concrete echoing each footstep with hollow finality. Makeshift tents lined the shadows, tarps, cardboard, blankets strung together with desperation. The flicker of a barrel fire illuminated cracked windshields and broken glass. Maya led him to a sagging tent of tarpaulin and threadbare quilts. The air smelled of damp earth and illness. Inside, another girl lay curled up beside a frail woman, her breath shallow, her skin glistening with sweat. "Mom," Maya whispered, kneeling at her side. "I brought someone." The woman stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open. Caldwell's heart stopped. He staggered back a step, his knees threatening to buckle. It was her, Naomi, older now, her once bright eyes dimmed by exhaustion, her skin lined with hardship. But it was her, Naomi Williams, the woman he had abandoned nearly 2 decades ago. "Naomi," he choked, his voice raw, her eyes widened, shock cutting through her fevered haze. "Roland?" she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. I didn't think, I never." Her words trailed off, her breath too shallow to finish. Maya glanced between them, confusion and curiosity flashing in her young eyes. Caldwell knelt beside Naomi, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "God, I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I was young, I was stupid, and I've regretted it every day since." Naomi's lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes. She squeezed his hand weakly, her voice fragile but firm. "You left. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I never told you," she paused, coughing, her chest heaving with the effort. Finally, she whispered, "I was already pregnant when you left." "Twins!" Caldwell's head snapped toward the second girl lying beside her. Thin, peaceful, her small chest rising and falling in sleep. She was the mirror of Maya, his daughters. The truth hit him with a force that stole his breath. His voice cracked as he whispered, "My daughters." He turned back to Maya, who stood at the edge of the tent, watching everything with a stillness far too heavy for her age. His heart split open in that moment, the past colliding with the present in a way he could no longer ignore. "I want to help," he said hoarsely, his voice carrying every ounce of sincerity in his body. "Not out of guilt, out of love, out of what I should have done years ago." Naomi's faint smile carried both pain and hope. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Then stay. Just stay." And in that frozen tent, under the harsh hum of the bridge above, Roland Caldwell, the billionaire who had conquered towers of steel and glass but never conquered, his own heart finally knew what he was meant to do. The return of the past, the snow had thickened by the time Roland helped Naomi into the SUV. Her frail body wrapped in a wool blanket that felt pitifully small compared to the years of cold she had endured. Maya climbed in beside her mother, clutching her hand as though she could anchor her to strength, while the other girl, Amira, Naomi whispered, remained half asleep in the crook of Naomi's arm. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, startled by the unexpected passengers in the luxury vehicle, but Roland's sharp look silenced any questions. The city rolled by in muted streaks of gray and gold, Christmas lights blurring into a haze as the car glided through the snow-laden streets. Roland sat across from them, his heart pounding with a confusion of emotions so fierce it almost frightened him. For years he had believed himself untouchable, armored by wealth and reputation. But in the dim glow of the SUV's interior, watching the rise and fall of Naomi's unsteady breath and the fragile way her daughters clung to her, he felt stripped bare. They arrived at a discreet boutique hotel that Roland had purchased years earlier as a private refuge, a place where visiting dignitaries or close confidants might stay without the glare of press. Tonight, however, it wasn't secrecy or business strategy driving him. It was the sudden, raw urgency to protect the fragile pieces of a family he hadn't known he had until hours earlier. The concierge, startled to see his usually composed employer with a shivering woman and two small children, moved with quiet efficiency when Roland issued instructions. The penthouse suite, a physician on call, hot food, fresh linens, and strict orders that no press was to catch a whisper of this. Within minutes, the family was ushered into warmth. Naomi was laid gently in a king-size bed while a physician examined her under the soft glow of bedside lamps. Pneumonia, the doctor concluded gravely, untreated for too long but reversible with medication and care. Roland exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Gratitude and guilt mingling in his chest. Maya and Amira, meanwhile, sat at the dining table where trays of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and warm rolls with honey butter had been placed. The sight of food seemed to unmoor them. They ate with a ferocity softened only by the manners Naomi must have instilled, whispering "thank you" between bites even as they devoured the meal. Roland stood by the window, watching them as though he were staring at a memory come alive little. Faces half his and half Naomi's, carrying echoes of the love he had abandoned but never forgotten. He felt something break open inside him, not with shame, but with a longing that was almost unbearable when the doctor left, prescribing rest. "And a course of antibiotics?" Roland lingered by Naomi's bedside. She stirred weakly, her hand finding his. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she whispered, her voice raspy. Proud Naomi, always so strong, and here I am, broken. He shook his head fiercely, his hand tightening around hers. "You're not broken. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I was the one who was weak." His voice cracked, years of silence spilling into the dim light. "I should have fought harder for us. I should have stayed." Naomi's eyes glistened, though exhaustion weighed her lids. "Roland, the world we lived in back then, it wasn't ready for us. You were a rich white boy from Harvard. I was a scholarship girl from Brooklyn. Everyone told me I wasn't enough, and I believed them. I didn't want your pity." "It wasn't pity," he said, his voice raw as he cupped her cheek. It was love, and it never went away. Her lips trembled with the faintest smile before she whispered, "Then show it now." Not with words, but with them. She nodded toward the adjoining room where the girls' laughter still floated faintly, muffled by distance but strong enough to reach them. They've never known safety, not truly. Don't give them promises you can't keep. I won't. Roland vowed, and for the first time in decades, he meant it with every fiber of his being. That night he did not return to his penthouse, with its glass walls and cold silence. Instead, he stayed awake in the armchair beside Naomi's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as sleep soothed her. Occasionally he rose to check on Maya and Amira, who had fallen asleep tangled in white duvets, their curls spread across pillows like crowns. Each time he saw them, his heart clenched, not only with recognition but with a gnawing sense of accountability. These were his daughters, his blood, children he should have protected from the moment they took their first breaths. The thought that they had endured hunger, cold, and the cruelty of indifference while he sat atop glass towers and signed contracts worth billions made him ache with shame. But there was also resolve and iron vow that from this night onward, they would never know such neglect again. By morning, the city awoke under a pale sun, the snow softened into slush on the sidewalks below. Roland, bleary-eyed from his vigil, sipped a cup of black coffee as he stood by the window. Behind him, the silence of the suite was peaceful. Naomi sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. The girls still curled together under the heavy blankets. It was a silence unlike any he had known, one that filled him not with emptiness but with something startlingly close to peace. Yet just as he let the calm settle, a quiet knock broke the moment. Martin, his trusted assistant, stood in the doorway holding a manila folder. "You told me to cancel everything," Martin said evenly, "but I thought you should see this." He handed over the folder, his eyes betraying the weight of its contents. Roland opened it slowly, scanning the legal documents and clipped newspaper headline inside. His stomach dropped as he read. Caldwell Properties CEO seen with homeless family on Christmas Eve, staged or redemption. They followed the car last night, Martin explained quietly. Nothing official yet, but speculation has begun. The story is out there. If word spreads, questions about the past will rise again, especially about the discrimination lawsuit that was never brought to court. Roland's jaw tightened. That lawsuit. Years ago, a building his company had acquired in Brooklyn had been accused of denying rental to a single black mother. He had claimed ignorance at the time, but now the coincidence gnawed at him. Was that mother Naomi? Had he unknowingly abandoned her once as a lover, once as a tenant? "Let them talk," he said at last, his voice low but steady. Done hiding?" Martin's brow furrowed. "This isn't just about you anymore. If you step forward with them, it changes everything, your reputation, the company, even your legacy." Roland turned to face the window again, watching the sunlight glint off the snow-slick streets. "That's exactly the point. I've built towers of steel and glass that will crumble someday. But what I saw last night, 2 little girls eating, like it was the first time they'd ever tasted comfort, that's something worth building, a home, a future. And I'll build it no matter what it costs." When Naomi awoke, stronger already after a night of warmth and care, Roland brought her breakfast on a tray: scrambled eggs, toast with marmalade, hot tea. She tried to protest, but he silenced her with a look that brooked no argument. As she ate slowly, he sat beside her, his eyes heavy with things unsaid. Finally he whispered, "Naomi, I need to know. Why didn't you tell me about them?" She set her cup down, her fingers trembling. "I wanted to," she admitted softly. "The night I found out I was pregnant, I picked up the phone. But I imagined your face when you heard the news, the disappointment in your parents, the whispers in your circles. I couldn't bear the thought of being your shame. I told myself I was protecting you, even if it meant raising them alone." Roland shook his head, pain lacing his voice. "You weren't protecting me, Naomi. You were carrying the weight alone when it should have been mine, too. I missed the their first steps, their first words, their first Christmases, and I'll never get those back." Naomi's eyes softened. You can't erase the past, Roland, but you can show up now. They don't need perfection. They just need presence. Her words struck him harder than any boardroom battle ever had. Presence. He had chased the world and lost the one thing that mattered most: showing up. For Naomi, for his daughters, for himself, that afternoon, Roland made a decision. He would no longer separate his life into the public man of power and the private man of regret. If the world wanted a story, they would get the truth, not a performance. Not a redemption arc spun by headlines, but the raw, imperfect truth. He called Martin and instructed him to reschedule the board meeting, not to cancel it. He would stand before them not as the ruthless CEO they expected, but as the man who had found something worth more than profit. Meanwhile, Naomi sat with her daughters in the penthouse living room, the city sprawling like a jeweled sea beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maya asked cautiously, "Mom, are we going to stay here forever?" Naomi hesitated, but before she could answer, Roland walked in, his voice steady. "You can stay as long as you want. But I was thinking, what if we found something better? A home, a real one." The girl's eyes lit up, and even Naomi, though wary, couldn't suppress the hope flickering in her gaze. "What kind of home?" she asked carefully. "I have a townhouse in Brooklyn," Roland said, his voice quiet but sure. "It's been empty for years. It belonged to my Aunt Lydia, the only person who ever believed in me when I was young and foolish. She would have loved you. And it's yours now, if you want it." Naomi studied him, searching for the catch. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," he said simply. "Just a chance to do the right thing, to be here, for you, for them." And as the girls chattered excitedly about rooms and beds and gardens, Naomi sat back, watching Roland with cautious eyes. She wanted to believe him, to believe that this time he would stay, that the promises weren't just words. But deep down, beneath the scars of years of hardship, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hold in a long time: hope. The house of second chances. The Caldwell townhouse stood at the corner of Hawthorne Street and Marcy Avenue, its red brick walls worn by decades of winters, its iron gates squeaking with every shift of the wind. For years it had sat empty, a relic of Roland's late Aunt Lydia, the woman who had taught him that worth wasn't measured in balance sheets, but in how one treated those who had less. He had always intended to sell it, but something had kept him from letting go. Now, as he stood on the stoop with Naomi at his side and the girls clutching their coats, he realized why. The house had not been waiting for him. It had been waiting for them. The girls pressed their faces against the cold glass of the front door, their excitement bubbling in bursts of giggles. "Is this really ours?" Maya whispered, her eyes shining with the kind of cautious wonder that only a child who had known too much loss could carry. Roland crouched beside her, placing his hand against the glass. "If you want it, then yes. This is your home." The words felt strange, almost fragile in his mouth, but also truer than anything he had spoken in years. When he unlocked the door, the hinges groaned like an old man waking from slumber. The air inside was stale, tinged with the scent of disuse and dust, but sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling the rooms with a golden haze that made everything shimmer with possibility. The wooden floors creaked as Maya and Amira raced from room to room, their laughter echoing against bare walls. They claimed corners and closets as though staking new territory, their joy transforming emptiness into belonging. Naomi stood in the foyer, her hand trailing across the banister worn smooth by Lydia's touch. Her eyes softened, but her lips trembled with unspoken doubt. She whispered almost to herself, "I never thought I'd step into a place like this again." Roland stood behind her, watching the weight in her shoulders, the way she seemed torn between trust and fear. "It's not charity," he said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "It's a second chance, for me, for us." Naomi's gaze flicked toward him, sharp but softened by something she couldn't name. "Second chances," she murmured. "They don't come often." He held her gaze steadily. "Then let's not waste this one." The house told stories even in its silence. A retro mint-green fridge hummed weakly in the kitchen, relic of a time when Lydia had brewed sweet tea. and insisted that love was stirred into every meal. A built-in cabinet in the dining room sagged under the weight of cobwebs, but still held chipped teacups painted with faded roses. Upstairs, the wallpaper peeled in curling edges, revealing layers of colors chosen by generations long gone. The girls discovered a bay window where dust motes danced like fireflies in the sun, and they squealed with delight, declaring it the reading corner. It wasn't perfect. Pipes groaned, radiators clanked, and a draft whistled through cracked panes, but for the first time in their young lives, it felt like they could belong somewhere. That evening, Roland called in contractors, electricians, painters, plumbers, men who arrived with toolboxes and skeptical glances at the billionaire walking through the halls in rolled-up sleeves, pointing out what needed to be fixed. But Roland didn't care about appearances. For once, he was not building for profit. He was building for permanence. Naomi watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, as he bent down to listen to the girls' elaborate plans for their bedrooms. Maya wanted walls painted a soft lavender, like the sky before night, while Amira insisted on bright yellow, like the sun when it's happy. Roland nodded solemnly, as if negotiating million-dollar deals, promising both would have exactly what they dreamed. Naomi shook her head, smiling despite herself, whispering, "You have no idea what you're getting into." He turned to her with a rare grin. "No," he admitted, "but I know it's worth it." Later, when the girls had finally collapsed into sleep in the hotel where they would stay until the townhouse was ready, Roland and Naomi sat on the balcony of the suite, the city glittering below like a restless sea. Naomi held a cup of peppermint tea, her hands trembling slightly against the steam. She turned to him suddenly, her voice low but firm. "They're already attached to you. Do you understand what that means? If you disappear again, if you choose the world over them like you once chose it over me, it will break them. It will break me." Her words cut through him sharper than any business rival ever had. He set his coffee aside and leaned closer, his voice steady but aching. "I know. And I swear to you, Naomi, I'm not leaving again. I thought I was building empires, but all I was building was walls. This, you, them. This is what I should have been building all along. I can't undo the past, but I can show up now, and I will." She studied him in silence for a long moment, her eyes searching for cracks in his conviction. Finally she exhaled, a sound that was part sigh, part surrender. "Then stay, stay, even when it's hard." He nodded, his throat tight, always. When the renovations began in earnest, the townhouse buzzed with life. Painters filled the rooms with fresh color, plumbers cursed the old pipes into working order, and electricians coaxed light into chandeliers that had gone dark for decades. But it was the small things that made it a home. Curtains chosen by Naomi fluttered in the breeze. Thrift store furniture was carried in by Martin and a few loyal staff, who had never questioned Roland's sudden transformation. The girls hung paper snowflakes from the ceiling, each one crooked and uneven but beautiful in its imperfection. Slowly, the house began to hum with a rhythm of belonging, but as the walls filled with color, whispers outside the home grew louder. Reporters caught glimpses of Roland walking through Brooklyn with Naomi and the girls, speculating about the billionaire's secret family. Tabloids spun lurid tales of hidden heirs and fallen moguls seeking redemption. The board of Caldwell Properties grew restless, murmuring about reputation, stockholders, and the dangers of sentimentality. For the first time in his career, Roland did not rush to manage perception. Instead, he told Martin, "Let them talk. The truth will outlast the noise." Naomi, however, carried the tension differently. One evening, as she tucked the girls into bed, she found Amira whispering, "Mommy, are we garbage?" Naomi froze, her heart lurching. "Why would you ask that, baby?" Amira's small voice cracked. "Because someone at the store said people like us are trash." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat burning. She kissed Amira's forehead and whispered fiercely, "No, you are not trash. You are gold. Never forget that." But when she stepped into the hallway, her tears betrayed the weight she carried, the fear that no matter how beautiful the townhouse became, the world would still try to erase them. Roland found her on the staircase, her shoulders trembling. Without a word, he sat beside her, wrapping her in silence. Finally, she whispered, "If you're serious about staying, then promise me something. No headlines, no performative charity. No PR spin, just love, even on the hard days. Even when it doesn't make sense." He took her hand, pressing it against his chest. "I swear, this isn't about redemption. It's about home." And for the first time in nearly 20 years, Naomi believed him. Storm over the towers for a few weeks, the townhouse bloomed with a fragile joy that felt almost unreal. The walls echoed with the laughter of Maya and Amira as they chased each other through hallways newly painted in lavender and yellow. The kitchen smelled of rosemary chicken and cornbread as Naomi rediscovered the rhythm of cooking with dignity instead of desperation. And Roland, who had once measured his life in market shares and profit margins, found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping his daughters assemble dollhouses and board games, marveling at the quiet contentment he had spent a lifetime chasing in all the wrong places. For the first time in years, the silence in his chest was replaced with something whole. But peace, as Roland knew all too well, was never permanent in his world. The storm arrived not as thunder or lightning, but in the polished shoes and tailored suits of his board members, who gathered around the long mahogany table of Caldwell Properties' executive conference room with eyes sharp as knives. The air in the room was cold, not from the central air system, but from the simmering disapproval radiating from men and women who had built their careers in the shadow of Roland's empire. "Roland," began Victor Hanley, his oldest and most ambitious board member, his voice measured but laced with venom, "the headlines are becoming a distraction. Photographs of you walking through Brooklyn with that woman and her children are not the image this company has cultivated. Investors are asking questions, stockholders are nervous, and frankly so are we." Roland sat at the head of the table, his hands folded calmly, though his jaw tightened with each word. He had once ruled these meetings like a king, every decision final, every objection crushed. But now, as he listened to the undercurrent of disdain in their voices, he realized how shallow their loyalty had always been. They hadn't followed him out of respect. They had followed power. "That woman," Roland said slowly, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass, "is Naomi Williams. She is the mother of my children. And those girls are my daughters. If anyone here thinks I will turn my back on them to appease the image of this company, you are gravely mistaken." A murmur rippled around the table, shock and outrage blending with opportunistic calculation. Victor leaned forward, his steely eyes narrowing. "You mean to tell us that you've had a secret family for nearly a decade and only now decided to parade them before the public? Do you realize the scandal this invites? The accusations of impropriety, of illegitimacy?" Roland's hand slammed against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "They are not a scandal. They are my blood. And if anyone in this room dares to reduce them to gossip, they will answer to me." The silence that followed was electric, broken only by the quiet shuffle of papers as another board member cleared her throat. "Roland, we respect your personal life, but personal choices have public consequences. We're on the verge of securing international contracts worth billions. One misstep, one whiff of impropriety, and it could all crumble." Roland leaned back, his eyes sweeping the room, his voice lowering into something dangerous. "If our empire crumbles because I chose to be a father, then it was built on sand to begin with. I will not apologize for love." "Not anymore?" The room bristled with discomfort. Some board members shifted nervously, others whispered behind hands, but Victor's gaze never wavered. He smirked, the faintest curl of triumph at the edge of his mouth, as though he had been waiting for this crack in Roland's armor. "Very well," Victor said smoothly. "But remember, Roland, investors are fickle, and loyalty has its limits." When the meeting adjourned, Roland remained in the room, staring out the tall glass windows that overlooked the city skyline. The towers he had built rose proudly, but for the first time, he wondered if they were monuments to success or prisons of pride. He had always believed power was security, but now he realized true security was the sound of his daughters laughing. In a house that smelled of dinner, the warmth of Naomi's hand on his. If the towers fell, so be it. He would build something stronger with them. Back at the townhouse, Naomi sensed the storm before Roland even spoke. She saw it in the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he held her just a second longer than usual that evening. She brewed tea, pressing the warm cup into his hands as they sat in the kitchen, the girls upstairs in bed. "They're fighting you, aren't they?" she asked softly. He nodded, staring into the steam. "They see you and the girls as a liability, a stain on the image they want for the company." Naomi's eyes darkened. "So what are you going to do?" Roland met her gaze, his voice steady. "I'm going to fight. Not for the company, for us." Naomi's breath caught, and though fear flickered in her expression, there was also something else, pride. She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Then we'll fight together." But outside their fragile sanctuary, the storm gathered. Momentum. Tabloids dug deeper, unearthing photographs of Naomi from years past, spinning cruel narratives about a fallen lover and hidden heirs. Reporters camped outside the townhouse, their flashbulbs blinding as Roland escorted his daughters to school. The whispers Naomi had shielded her girls from now hissed in their ears at playground gates. Cruel children parroting the poison of their parents. One afternoon, Maya came home with tears streaking her cheeks, clutching her broken locket. "They said I don't belong," she sobbed. Roland knelt before her, his heart breaking as he fastened the chain back together. "You belong more than anyone," he whispered fiercely. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." But even as he comforted her, he knew the war wasn't just in schoolyards or headlines. It was in boardrooms where men like Victor sharpened knives behind polished smiles, waiting for Roland to falter. And falter he did, not in love, but in power. Contracts slipped through fingers, investors hesitated, stocks wavered. For the first time in decades, the empire shook, yet in the townhouse on Hawthorne Street, something unshakable grew stronger. On nights when the pressure of the world pressed hard against his chest, Roland found solace in Amira's giggles as she insisted on reading him bedtime stories. In Maya's quiet determination as she sketched pictures of their house with crayons. In Naomi's unwavering presence beside him, her voice steady even when her own fears clawed at her. As they sat together in the living room, the house humming with warmth, Roland turned to Naomi, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "I spent my life building towers that mean nothing now. But this house, these girls, this is the only legacy I want. If the empire falls, I'll let it, but I will not lose this." Naomi's eyes glistened as she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then hold on, because storms don't last forever, but families do." And as the snow began to fall again outside, blanketing the city in silence, Roland Caldwell, the billionaire who once believed only in steel and glass, realized that his true empire was not built on towers but on love. But the storm was far from over. In the shadows of the city, Victor Hanley plotted, and the world watched, hungry for scandal. The real test was yet to come. Betrayal in the spotlight, the storm that had begun in whispers now swelled into a roar that could not be ignored. The tabloids, once content with shadowy photographs and speculation, now screamed headlines across front pages and news feeds. "Billionaire's secret family revealed. Caldwell's empire cracks under scandal." From penthouse to playgrounds, the untold story of Roland Caldwell. The media frenzy was relentless, and though Roland had expected it, the sheer brutality of the spectacle caught even him off guard. Every step he took outside the townhouse was pursued by flashing cameras. Every movement analyzed, twisted, and repackaged into narratives that sold papers and earned clicks. But what hurt most was not the invasion into his life, it was watching Naomi and the girls be dragged into a spotlight they had never asked for. One morning, as Roland escorted Maya and Amira to school, a reporter thrust a microphone into his face, shouting, "Mr. Caldwell, is it true you denied being their father until the press forced you to acknowledge them? Are you using these children to clean up your reputation?" Maya's small hand tightened around his, her knuckles white, her wide eyes brimming with confusion. He shielded her from the cameras with his coat, his jaw set with fury, But the question pierced him all the same. For years he had chosen silence, and now his silence was being used as proof of denial. He realized with bitter clarity that when you fail to write your own truth, the world will happily write lies in its place. Inside Caldwell Properties, the pressure mounted like a ticking bomb. Investors pulled out of negotiations. Partnerships dissolved under the weight of public scrutiny. Stocks plunged. And at the center of it all stood Victor Hanley, polished and calculating, his eyes glinting with opportunity. He convened a special board meeting, his voice dripping with concern yet sharpened with malice. "The company is bleeding," Victor declared as he stood before the board, gesturing to charts that plummeted like falling stars. "Our CEO's personal decisions have become liabilities. Shareholders are demanding stability. We must consider leadership transition for the good of the company." Roland sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, his face unreadable. He listened as allies grew silent and adversaries found courage in numbers. He had faced hostile takeovers before, but never one fueled by the very truth he had long avoided. When Victor finally looked him in the eye, daring him to fight, Roland rose slowly, his voice steady but low, like the growl of a storm before it breaks. "If you think you can strip me of this company because I chose to stand with my family, then you've underestimated me, Victor." "You've always underestimated me." The room buzzed with tension. Victor smirked, confident in his growing coalition. "This isn't about family, Roland, it's about leadership. And right now, you're leading us into ruin." Roland leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "No, Victor, it's about greed. You've been waiting for this moment, circling like a vulture, hoping my love for them would make me weak. But here's the truth, I've never been stronger. Because for the first time in my life, I have something worth losing. And that makes me dangerous." The words silenced the room, though Roland knew the war was far from over. Victor would not back down. The vote loomed, and betrayal lurked in every handshake and hushed whisper. That evening, back at the townhouse, Roland found Naomi in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, reading the storm in his expression before he spoke. "They want to oust me," he admitted. "Victor's pushing for a vote." Naomi set down the knife, her shoulders tense. "And what will you do if they succeed?" He hesitated, then spoke with conviction. "Then I'll walk away. With you, with the girls. I've spent my life chasing towers of glass, but they mean nothing compared to this home. If the board wants my company, they can have it. But they can't take what matters most." Naomi's eyes softened, though her voice trembled. "Do you mean that, Roland? Truly mean it? Because we're not a consolation prize. We're not what you fall back on when the empire collapses. We are the empire, if you let us." He reached for her hand, pressing it against his chest. "You're not what I fall back on. You're what I've been searching for all along." But even as he spoke, the shadows lengthened. Days later, a story broke that cut deeper than any headline before. A tabloid published an expose claiming Naomi had once been denied housing by Caldwell Properties in the very building Roland's company had acquired years ago. The article painted a damning picture, a billionaire who abandoned his lover, fathered children he never claimed, and whose empire thrived on the suffering of the very family he now paraded as his redemption. The article went viral within hours. Protesters gathered outside Caldwell Properties headquarters, chanting slogans, holding signs that read, "Families over fortune" and "No redemption through exploitation." Victor seized the moment, appearing on news broadcasts with carefully crafted concern. "If these allegations are true," he intoned gravely, "then the integrity of Caldwell Properties is at stake. We must ask ourselves if Roland Caldwell is fit to lead." The townhouse became a fortress under siege. Reporters swarmed the gates, cameras flashing day and night. Maya and Amira cried themselves to sleep, frightened by the shouting outside. Naomi, weary from years of hardship, now found herself thrust into a battlefield she had never asked for. One night, as they sat together in the dim light of the living room, she turned to Roland, her voice raw. "I can't do this, Roland. I can't watch them suffer because of me, because of us. Maybe you should let us go." The words stabbed him deeper than any corporate betrayal. He gripped her hands, his eyes blazing. "Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare think you're the reason for this. You are the reason I finally know what matters. And I will not let them or anyone take you away from me." But Naomi's tears fell anyway, silent rivers of doubt carved by years of struggle. Roland held her, his own heart breaking, knowing that love alone might not be enough to withstand the storm. The board vote came like a trial by fire. In the grand conference hall, cameras flashed as shareholders gathered, reporters pressing at the edges, the world watching. Victor stood with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already his, while Roland stood tall, his daughters and Naomi seated quietly in the back. Their presence a silent testimony. Victor spoke first, painting Roland as reckless, blinded by sentiment, a liability to the empire they had built. The crowd murmured in agreement, the tide of power seemingly shifting in his favor. Then Roland stepped forward, his voice steady, his presence commanding. "I have been accused of many things in my career," he began. "Ambition, ruthlessness, greed, and perhaps those accusations were true once. But let me tell you what I am guilty of today. I am guilty of loving a woman I should have never left. I am guilty of discovering daughters I should have known years ago. And I am guilty of realizing too late that no tower of glass and steel will ever matter more than the warmth of a home filled with laughter. If that makes me unfit to lead in your eyes, then so be it. But I would rather lose this company than lose them again." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing heavy against every heart. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others shifted, reconsidering. And in the back, Maya squeezed Amira's hand, whispering, "That's our dad." The vote was cast. The outcome teetered on a knife's edge. Betrayal hung heavy, but so did truth. And as Roland looked at Naomi and the girls, his heart calmed despite the storm. He realized something profound. No matter the outcome, he had already won. The legacy of Love the Air inside the Caldwell Properties conference hall was thick with tension, every breath carrying the weight of anticipation. The vote had been cast, and for a moment the silence felt eternal, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Roland stood tall at the head of the room, his hands resting on the table, his eyes fixed not on the board members who shuffled papers nervously, but on the back of the hall where Naomi sat with Maya and Amira. Their small faces were pale, but resolute, their hands clasped tightly together. Naomi's gaze met his, steady and unwavering despite the storm raging around them. For that single moment, nothing else mattered. The results were read aloud with all the ceremony of a court verdict, a narrow margin, razor thin, but enough. Roland Caldwell retained his position as CEO. Gasps rippled through the room, shock mingling with reluctant applause. Victor Hanley's smirk faltered, his face tightening with fury as he realized his carefully laid plans had slipped through his grasp. He had underestimated Roland's power not as a businessman, but as a man who had finally embraced truth. Roland did not gloat. He did not celebrate. Instead, he spoke with quiet conviction, his voice carrying across the hall. "This vote changes nothing. My daughters are still my daughters. Naomi is still the love of my life. And no headline, no scandal, no attempt at sabotage will erase that. Caldwell Properties will not just be a company that builds towers. It will be a company that builds homes, real homes, for families who need them most." The declaration stunned the room. It was not strategy. It was not rhetoric. It was a vow. And in that moment, Roland was no longer just a billionaire at the head of an empire. He was a father, a partner, and a man who had discovered that true wealth was not measured in dollars, but in love. Outside, the press swarmed, hungry for his statement. For the first time, Roland faced them without hesitation, Naomi and the girls standing at his side. The cameras flashed, questions were hurled, but Roland raised his hand, his voice strong. "You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I left the woman I loved. And yes, I failed to be there for my daughters when they needed me most. But I am here now. I am not hiding them. I am not ashamed of them. They are my family. And if that costs me fortune, reputation, or power, then so be it. Because nothing is worth more than this. The footage spread across the world within hours. Some mocked him. Others doubted him, but many more were moved. Letters poured in from single mothers, from children raised without fathers, from families who had known hardship. They wrote of hope, of second chances, of how seeing someone so powerful admit his failures gave them courage to face their own. What began as scandal slowly shifted into something else, an emblem of redemption. In the weeks that followed, Roland put action to his words. He announced the launch of the Lydia Foundation, named after the aunt who had once believed in him, dedicated to building affordable housing and providing education for families in need. The board balked, investors hesitated, but Roland pressed forward with the stubborn determination that had built his empire. Only this time, the empire he sought to build was not of glass and steel, but of dignity and opportunity. The townhouse on Hawthorne Street became more than just a home. It became a symbol. Journalists who once circled like vultures now wrote stories of transformation, photographing Maya and Amira planting flowers in the front garden, capturing Naomi teaching the girls to cook in a kitchen that now rang with laughter. The girls thrived in school, their pride growing with every step they took into a world that once told them they did not belong. And Roland, who had once dined alone in silence atop skyscrapers, now sat at a wooden table scarred by years, eating meals surrounded by laughter, stories, and love. One spring evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city in hues of gold, Roland stood on the townhouse porch, watching his daughters chase fireflies across the lawn. Naomi stepped beside him, her hand slipping into his. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He turned to her, his eyes soft. "No," he said gently. "We kept it. Together." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice quiet but filled with wonder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd stayed together back then?" He smiled faintly, watching Maya laugh as Amira cupped a glowing firefly in her hands. "All the time. But I think maybe we had to walk through the fire to understand what truly matters. We had to lose each other to find what we were meant to build." Naomi nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, though this time they were not of sorrow but of gratitude. "Then let's never lose it again." And they did single quotes months later at a groundbreaking ceremony for the Lydia Foundation's first housing project. Roland stood at a podium, Naomi and the girls at his side. Before him stretched a crowd of families, children holding balloons, mothers wiping tears from their eyes, fathers holding their sons on their shoulders. Cameras rolled, reporters scribbled, but Roland's gaze remained fixed on the faces before him, the faces of people who deserved more than survival, who deserved a chance to thrive. "This," he said, gesturing to the land behind him where bulldozers stood ready, "is where we begin again. Not just as a company, not just as a city, but as a community. No child should ever dig through trash on Christmas Eve to find food. No mother should ever choose between dignity and survival. We are here to change that. And I promise you, this is only the beginning." The crowd erupted in applause, and Roland turned, lifting Maya into his arms as Amira clung to his side. Naomi smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. In that moment, surrounded by hope and possibility, Roland knew that his legacy was no longer written in contracts or towers. It was written in laughter and second chances, in love. Years later, when people spoke of Roland Caldwell, they did not speak only of the empire he had built or the fortune he had amassed. They spoke of the man who had walked away from power to hold the hands of two little girls and the woman he had once abandoned. They spoke of the houses he built, not for profit, but for families. They spoke of the truth he finally embraced, that the greatest empire a man can build is a home filled with love. And on quiet nights, when the city lights flickered like stars and the world outside still clamored with ambition, Roland would sit by the bay window with Naomi and their daughters, watching fireflies dance in the dark. He would smile, not with regret, but with peace, because he had finally found what he had been searching for all along.